The agenda this week learned why Canadian expats are an untapped resource for this country, debated whether it's time to ditch the monarchy, and spoke to Jann Arden about the joys of aging. The agenda's week in review begins assessing the Ontario government's struggle to communicate its COVID-19 message to the province.
I get lots of emails and phone calls from people asking me questions and telling me their experiences. And I'll just repeat one that I have heard probably more than any other one recently, and then get you to weigh in on this. Once upon a time, when the province reopened gymnasiums, hockey rinks, fitness facilities, they did not require mask use, and then we had outbreaks, and then they shut everything down. Well, in the 4 jurisdictions where we've gone to modified stage 2. But then they reopened dance studios. And of course, schools are still open with 30 kids in a class where there are 30 desks, and they're not 2 meters apart. But movie theaters are shut down where even if 10 people are in a cinema of 250 seats, that's unacceptable. Can you please make sense of all of that for us?
Nobody can make sense of that. There's too much internal inconsistency. There ought to have been one simple rule applied starting from Labor Day, if not earlier, which is unless you live in the same household, you do not be indoors with anyone without a mask, full stop. And for situations where you might be in a larger place with people for some period of time, then we need to work out guidelines for that. For example, movie theaters. But the way the rules have been announced and enacted, not based on evidence at all, not based on emerging evidence, and not explained to people. So no, I'm afraid I cannot make sense of those.
Heidi, do you see either simplicity or consistency in any of those decisions from the province of Ontario?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, it's a massive problem that people can't understand the guiding philosophy behind why some things are open and shut.
Matt, how about you?
I've written a column about this for tvo.org where I talked about the emails I get from all the various extracurricular or athletic activities my kids are involved in. Not only can I make sense of it, the people who have to make sense of it can't make sense of it. One example I noted was that my 8-year-old daughter went to a gymnastics program that was indoors, and they were shut down when we went to modified stage 2. But it took about a week for the owners of the gymnastics studio to figure out if they, under the law, were a gym, which is the root, which is adapted from gymnastics, or if they were an indoor recreation facility. And depending on which one they were legally, different rules and conditions would have applied. And it took them about a week to figure this out. I was getting constant, almost daily emails from them going, we don't know if we're open. We don't know if we're open. And they eventually decided that they were not open. They eventually did close down. But if you have good faith efforts by business owners and facility operators to figure out what the rules are, and it needs 7 to 10 days and meetings with city officials and their local MPPs to do it, that's a sign of a system that is simply not working.
The top doc in this province is David Williams. He's the Chief Medical Officer of Health for the province of Ontario. Let's listen to a little bit of something he recently had to say about these issues. Sheldon, if you would.
In the first wave, when they did case contact management, they had an average of 10 to 12 people that were contacts of the case. Now they say it's quite common to have 50 to 60 to 70, even up to 100 of a case. That's saying the last 5 to 7 days you were in close contact with. And my thinking is, I don't understand that. Why would you have that kind of thing? What did you not understand about our messaging? And if you get a sense, there's somewhat of frustration, because to me the messaging has been said and said again. It's so clear, it's obvious.
Amanda, the messaging is so clear, it's obvious. As a communication strategy, would you recommend that to a client?
No. And, I'm sure I know Dr. David Williams is working very hard behind the scenes, as all the people there are. But I think, anyone who's watched his press conferences, and I've watched more than a few, would admit that communications is not his strong suit. And I think that's one of the big problems here is we get clips like this, which are, there's the gif of Julia Roberts looking at the ceiling trying to figure out what math equations going around. I cannot make head or tail of what he says half the time. And part of what happens then is that then shifts the burden of communication onto the politicians, who are driven by the whims of different regions and different electoral districts. And of course, I think politicians have a role to play in making these calls, but not to have a strong person to be able to communicate with you from a medical perspective, I think is really hurting us as a province. And it's forcing a lot of this on political actors who frankly aren't equipped to make these kind of calls either.
Colin, what's your view of Dr. Williams' communication abilities?
I think his poor communication isn't the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. I don't think he understands public health the way we need him to. He doesn't seem to understand testing strategy. He definitely doesn't understand social network theory and bubbling. His recommendations run counter to first principles and common sense so often that it would be impossible for anyone, I think, to explain that really clearly. Since July, I've been asking him to vacate his office. He is not up to the job based on the experience and expertise he does not have.
Okay, let's, Sheldon, can I ask you for a four-shot here? Can we see all the guests at once? Can I see a show? Okay, Colin has gone on the record here, as he has for many months. Can I see a show of hands? How many people think the medical officer of health for the province of Ontario ought to be replaced immediately? Hands up, please. Okay, Colin's got a hand up. I see Heidi is on the fence. The other two are not. Matt, how come you're not calling for his resignation?
I'm not convinced there's anyone better to replace him with at this time. If you look coast to coast across this country, we've had two standout public health officers in BC and Alberta, and in the second wave, both those provinces are struggling. They did fairly well in the first wave. They're taking it on the chin this wave. If I was confident there was someone better waiting in the wings that we could, yank Dr. Williams, send him off to a well-earned retirement, and put in someone new, I would do it. Like, you know me, Steve. I don't mind firing a hockey coach if the season's not going the way it needs to. I don't mind doing that at all. But I would need to be convinced that that would lead to an upgrade. And I would think right now there is absolutely a very real chance that it would take a bad situation and make it worse. I don't assume the problems in Ontario right now are the result of Dr. Williams, and I do not assume that removing him would immediately make any improvement. We're in the middle of a second wave right now, and sometimes you go to war with the soldiers you have, not the ones you want. And for better or worse, here we are.
I think that the idea of using Canadians at all levels while they are abroad to better our home country is something that John and the book and this idea of Planet Canada is going to pay off for us exponentially over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And in particular, what kind of drove it home for me was the idea of us not fretting so much about whether we are experiencing brain drain or brain gain, something that we always talk about when we talk about expats and Canadians going and living abroad. Oftentimes there's this fretting about Canadians leaving our country and then leaving the talent and expertise that they have with them. And I think that John's idea and the whole thesis that no, in fact, Canadians that go abroad, it is brain gain for Canada. And if we are intentional about reaching out and connecting, not just to the CEOs and heads of companies and heads of institutions that live abroad, but Canadians of all walks of life, all expertise at all levels of their careers that are abroad, and drawing them into the future of Canada and the Canadian story that we are trying to create in our hometowns, then in fact, what we are doing is building this 11th, this 13th province and territory, I'd like to say, that can really benefit richly to our domestic experience, Canadian experience, but also this idea of our global Canadian experience and the global footprint that we want to leave as Canada.
And just to pick up on what Nadia was saying, Kirsten, when we do think when Canadians leave the country, we think of it maybe as a loss. Should we change how we look at that and look at it more as of a gain, as Nadia was suggesting?
Absolutely. And I think this idea of a cycle, I think, John points that out in the book around the fact that this is not about a brain drain or brain loss. This is a brain cycle. And going out into the world and then coming back to Canada, I know myself, I've done that about 3 or 4 times. I've left the country, gone to find, some great jobs to do internationally. I tend to always come back. And I think, there hopefully is a benefit back to the country when people like myself decide that, they've had a great experience overseas or in another country and, have learned a lot and can bring some of that back to the country, including those networks that we built internationally. Like, I think there is that sense of a brain cycle, which is so powerful.
You said that you always come back. Is that because of family, or is it because Canada is home?
Canada is home. And yeah, I do have family here, but I also have family globally. And I think for so many of us, I think the wonderful thing about Canada is we are a nation of largely immigrants. And so whether it's ourselves or our parents who have come to Canada, there is this sense of a constant looking to globally. Like, I think we're global citizens, and there is this kind of home. There's a homebodiness about what we experience as well, and I think sometimes we miss home when we're away from it. And as much as we can be proud of being, in this world and being global, there is something about coming home too. And I've always done it. I'll be curious to see if I do it again this time.
Mm-hmm. And Andrea, I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, because so many of us are children of different cultures, as John said in his book as well. My parents they moved to Canada from the UK, and both have Guyanese roots, and I'm first generation Canadian. So I grew up with a lot of other first generation Canadians. And I think growing up, I probably felt a little bit more Guyanese than Canadian. And when I moved to the States, I think it was even more important for me to know, to really shout that I'm Canadian. And especially having small children, making sure that they know that they're as Canadian as they are American as well. So, I think being a first generation Canadian also gives us the opportunity, or gives us this different, I'd say we're maybe a little bit more empathetic to different cultures as well. And I think that helps us when we're in the US and other places overseas.
And Jeremy, was there anything in particular that John said that you strongly related to?
Yeah, well, I think that he had a great idea to mention the C100, these tech geniuses in the Silicon Valley who have banded together. They're all Canadian, and they help Canadians in the Silicon Valley, and they go back to Canada and help. There could be there's all this goodwill. People go away, they're away, they feel more Canadian, they want to help. We could have a kind of M100 for people in media and sports like Christine and Andrea, an F100 for people in food, and an H100 for people in health. I mean, here at Oxford alone, Professor Sir John Bell is leading the charge to get a vaccine for the coronavirus, and he's way higher than I am, but I'm also not bad at what I do. So there's all this opportunity and this goodwill. So being intentional about it, as Nadia said, it should be a pretty easy task that could pay huge dividends.
What does the monarchy, in your view, provide Canadians?
Well, I think a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy is a very stable form of government. The Crown, as representing the state, as embodied by the Queen, is a very, I believe, has provided this country with a very stable, as I said, overarching sense of government that has provided continuity. The Crown has a history of protecting minorities in this country. And I think that as the Queen embodies the state, if you look at a republic, for example, the president is the personification of the state, of the government in a republic. And if the president is dysfunctional, then the government is dysfunctional because it is so such a personal thing. And we only have to look to that great republic to our south to see that. When the president is dysfunctional, you do have problems arising where you can't even guarantee the peaceful transference of power, as we're now seeing during this election.
Okay, Peter Donolo, let me ask you the same question. What, in your view, does the monarchy provide to Canada?
Well, listen, I think the monarchy is an anachronism. There was a case for it, certainly in our early years as a country, 150 years ago. But my basic problems with the monarchy are twofold. One is that I don't believe that high public office, any public office, but particularly the head of state, high public office, should be hereditary, should be passed from one generation to another within a single family. I think that's fundamentally undemocratic and at odds with a modern democracy. And secondly, to add insult to injury, This is a British monarchy. It's a foreign institution. They're foreigners who are our heads of state. I think Queen Elizabeth is a figure of tremendous. She's a very impressive person. She's kept this institution going much longer than it should have. I think we should adopt a practice from the NHL and the other major leagues. And when she goes, we should retire her jersey.
Well, that's a nice analogy. Let me ask the follow-up question, which is your former boss, Jean Chrétien, had a lovely relationship with the Queen of England. How does he feel about your taking this position?
He still does. He's only the sixth member, only the sixth Canadian ever to be on the Order of Merit, which is the only order that the Queen personally chooses. He's only the third Canadian Prime Minister to be there. He's known her for about 60 years, or certainly 50 years. So he's a monarchist. He and I disagree. He would also feel that this is not a top of mind issue for most Canadians, and in that he's right. But listen, that's always the case with issues like this. We're kind of like, we don't want to deal with it because it's too much trouble. We're like the millennial kid living in the parents' basement because it's easy. It's easier than moving out. Well, we were very slow in adopting a lot of the usual vestiges of independence. It took us almost 100 years as a country before we adopted our own flag. But we slowly but surely we've done these things. The monarchy is the last item of unfinished business in this regard, and we should check it off the list.
Delia, what's your view on what the monarchy provides to Canada?
My view on what the monarchy provides to Canada is with respect to Indigenous people, in that the original treaties were signed with the representatives of the Crown in earlier years in the right of Great Britain, and later on in right of Canada, and in Ontario in right of both Canada and Ontario. And for that reason, symbolically, it's very important for many Indigenous people, especially the elders, to maintain that relationship with the Crown. However, my perspective is that the duties that ensued from the treaties have been taken over by the Crown and right of Canada and the Crown and right of the different provinces. And so if there was a republic, the duties or the enforcements required to ensure that the treaties continue between the original Great Britain pre-Confederation would continue in any case, because the courts have ruled many times that the duties are embedded in the Crown and right of Canada and in the Crown and right of the provinces. And so that would remain.
And my mom was no. And I think it's because she looked at her own life and went, I hope you want more than this. And it was heartbreaking and pivotal for me at the same time. But she also said to me in my 20s when I was starting to do music, why not you? Why not you? And because I had a mom that championed me and accepted me and cheered me on despite a massive thing in the world telling me that I couldn't do it, that I shouldn't be able to. Because I had her voice ringing in my head when I didn't have my own. So that was a big part of my story and continues to be. My mom informs my life and my decisions every single day, and she's been gone a couple of years now.
I think that's her picture over your left shoulder, is it not?
That's me in the back of a book, but I think my mom is here. Here's my mom.
There we go. Well,
yeah.
Those two quotes you gave of your mother's are great, but there was a third one that I wrote down because I thought it was very compelling as well, and that one was, if you can't be brave, be reckless. Now, are those are not the words I would have thought that would come out of the mouth of a mom in rural Alberta in the 1960s or 70s. What did you infer from those?
Well, I think my mom had stolen that from my Aunt Ern, my great Aunt Ern. So it was my mother's aunt, and she was about 4'0". And my Aunt Ern was a person that would jump off a bridge or drive a car through a fire. And I think she had a lot of influence on my mom. And to me, that always just meant just do it. Just worry about it's easier to beg forgiveness than ask for permission. I think that's kind of what I gleaned from that. And sometimes, recklessness is the absence of bravery. But I feel like they work in tandem. I really do, Steve. It's sometimes a reckless conjures up, someone not caring and not being aware of the lives they're affecting around them. But I think you can be insulated and still be reckless and not, hurt other people. But that was my mom. I didn't always understand everything she said to me, that's for sure.
I want to put one of your dad's quotes to you as well, because he had something that I jotted down here as well. He said, the worst marriages don't end in divorce. They don't end.
Don't end.
Which is a pretty, it's a pretty out there thing for somebody who was married for 60 years to be saying, right? So what did you infer from that?
I think the fact that people feel martyred, I think sometimes in marriages, maybe my parents were cut from a cloth where you stay together no matter what. And my mom said, well, we just felt like we had more together than we did apart, and neither of us wanted to start over again. But she did kick him out at one point. I think 15, 20 years into their marriage, she booted him out of the house, and because of his drinking, obviously. But my dad, as much as he joked, a lot of the time there was a lot of truth in his very bizarre sense of humor. He used to always tell me, first the man, he takes the drink, then the drink, he takes the man. And that always stuck with me too, in a haunting kind of a way. It stole so much of his life. Even when he quit drinking, he resented it so much that he was kind of a miserable guy. My friend Stephanie called him the goddammit guy.
But your mother would only call him the GD guy because she never swore, right?
She didn't swear until she got Alzheimer's, and then she said things that I never ever thought I'd hear coming out of her mouth. But my God, did we laugh.
Well, let me get back on the drugs and alcohol issue, because, and I can't remember who said this. It might have been your dad. You might have heard it from someone else. People who abuse drugs and alcohol are practicing how to die. That must have hit you hard, eh?
It did. And I never wanted to be like my dad. I figured if I didn't drink rum, that I would never be like him. That's what he drank all the time, and he always smelled of rum. If rum was the last thing in a minibar, I wouldn't drink it, even if I was desperate, if that tells you anything. I think any kid that witnesses an alcoholic parent and the unilateral damage that drinking does in a family, I just feel for them so much. I regret so many of the things that I did in my life. I just always thought that I had control of alcohol and that it wasn't a problem. And it was because I didn't drink like my dad that I thought I was okay. I was kind of a binger. I wasn't one of those people that woke up and started drinking in the morning. So I thought, I can't be an alcoholic if I'm not like that. Because my dad drank every day, all day. When I did drink, which was, maybe a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, I sort of wasted myself. But then I wouldn't drink for 4 days. And I thought, see, I don't have a problem. I'm fine. And that's just not how alcohol works. I always say to people that ask me about stopping drinking, and I get asked all the time, how did you stop? That's always a telling question to me if they're coming to me and asking me that. My answer to them is always, if you have looked in a mirror at any time in your life, recently, not so recently, and if you've said to yourself, in that moment, with you, your toothbrush, and the mirror, and you've said, you're drinking too much. You're drinking too much, Jann. I said that to myself so many times over the years. Don't give up trying. Don't give up trying to stop, because that voice gets quieter and quieter and quieter as you progress in a disease like alcoholism. Any kind of addiction, that voice gets quieter. But I got lucky. I just had the sense to stop doing it, and I'm very grateful.
That's just some of what we covered this week on the agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.